Hi everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of the Uncertain Podcast. And I think that you don't know how much excited I am about today's topic. Why? Well, it's something that I really love. And today's topic is about languages or learning a languages more specifically. It is something that I've been doing for many years since, I can say since I was a child, but when I wasn't even aware of because I want to tell you my experience, give you some tip if you are learning a language and many more things. Starting, I don't know if many of you know, but my first language is not English, and I think I already said that in one of my previous episodes. My first language is Spanish, and it is a language that I love because it is my native language, but also because as I was learning other languages, I realized that it is very useful. It's a very useful language in the sense that there are many countries that speak it, and if I travel to certain countries, I would find the language barrier. But something that I found out is that the Spanish language is so hard to learn. But I have I am lucky that I am a native Spanish speaker. So, but speaking of my journey about learning languages, in particular English, I started learning at 7, which is when they began to teach it in school in my country. At first, I only saw it as an obligation, and that is why I said that something that I wasn't even aware of because it was something like obligation. I mean, English, I have to do this, the homework, and all of that. And it was not until I entered high school that I am starting to get more interest in languages. So I wanted to learn more, but since my parents couldn't pay me for an institute or private classes, I have to start looking for ways to learn it on my own. I think that with today's technology, it is much easier to learn something now than a few decades ago, and the tool that helped me the most on my secret web and the tool that helped me the most and my secret weapon is not so big that a secret, but it is YouTube. YouTube is such a powerful tool to learn languages. That place is magical for someone who wants to learn a language. You can find all the topic, teacher, channels that you can imagine, and that is precisely the biggest problem that I found, since there are many places where you can search and extract information. It is difficult to know where to start. It's more difficult if you start a language from scratch. To me in particular, I had a base of a few years and I was not completely lost. But I think that is where my critical look comes in on learning to select the best sources to learn English. And another thing that helped me when I was just starting with all of this was the apps. I tried many until I found some that helped me, but I reached a point where I had to leave them because I felt like I was stuck in the same place. I couldn't move forward. Being self-taught was difficult in many aspects since one has to learn to know when something is not working or when I have to approach a topic from another point of view or when I have to go to something more difficult to get out of the comfort zone and not feel stuck because there are always something new to learn. The most difficult, in addition to everything that I already mentioned, are difficult to identify when you don't have someone to tell you that you are making a mistake because if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know the mistake you are doing, it's most likely that you will repeat it again without realizing it. And you have to believe me when I say that I've made many mistakes. Even after years of learning, I still do them. And I know that in this podcast I have made some mistakes that I didn't realize that I was making them. So, something that I want to ask you is that if you notice any mistake, feel free to let me know so we can learn from each other. If you are a native English speaker, I hope you can understand me. And if you are someone who is learning English, I also hope that you can understand me, but I hope I can make you some company on this journey. I don't know if you remember, but in this podcast about loneliness, I've told you that one of the reasons why I started this podcast is because I was struggling with loneliness. But the other reason is because I wanted to improve my English. So here I am. I remember the first podcast that I recorded, and it was so difficult because I was so afraid to make mistakes, and it took me like a month to even record that first podcast. I remember that I began to record that first podcast in October of last year, and it's been months until I decided to upload it, and I was so scared, but I'm not afraid anymore, but I know that I have to be aware that sometimes I do mistakes and I have to improve to not make some mistakes in the future. So moving on, apart from English, I studied Portuguese for about 6 months, and that was a few years ago. But since I didn't continue studying, I began to forget it. And now, a year ago, I've been studying French. I began to study it in my quarantine when I was bored, and now I love studying. And I think it's because it's a beautiful language, and I think I could say some things about the grammar, but not today. And I'm thinking of learning another language, maybe this year or the next, but first I wanted to have at least an intermediate level in French, and I still don't know what next language will be, but I'm thinking of something more difficult like Japanese or Chinese. I don't know. I particularly love the beauty of the Japanese language, so, but I don't know. Now let's move on to the most important part of this podcast. I'm going to give you some tips for me to learn the language. I wanted to clarify that perhaps this tip will not help you because we all have different ways of learning and there is not only one way or the best way. And another thing that I want to say is that I learned English since I was a little girl and I was acquiring it as I grew up until a few years ago that I really began to learn it, and that is why it was not so difficult for me. But with French it is another story because I learned French from scratch and without previous knowledge. That's why I'm going to tell you what and is helping me in learning the French language. So the first thing that I did is that for a few weeks just listen to the language and its sounds. Listen to music, watch movies and series. I looked for YouTubers in that language and I watched their videos. I also listened to many podcasts in that language, all without subtitles on or with subtitles in that language. It is the most, I gotta tell you, it is the most frustrating, boring, and everything you can imagine because you don't understand a single thing. But what it does for me is to create familiarity for when I go to study it in depth, and when I'm studying it, I say to myself, hey, I heard this somewhere, and somehow that makes the learning progress easier. The other thing that I do is regarding grammar, is to learn only the present almost by heart, not other grammatical rule, and then learn from there what I need according to my level and what I want to say. I don't go crazy about all those grammar rules and stuff, and it doesn't mean I don't study them either. I'm just talking about the beginning. And the reason why I do this is because I don't like grammar books or books in general that teach languages because I see them very structured and far from what is really spoken. Maybe a lot of people find it useful and that's fine. The important thing is that you use a method that helps you. But it has never worked for me, and it is also because I like to learn the language while listening to it, and I think that a book cannot offer me that. I know that some come with CDs and everything, but they are kind of robotic, and the truth is that it doesn't work for me. The other tip, I don't know if it will be a tip because I think it's something that I think we all do when we learn a language, is to learn the core survival phrases like how are you, good morning, good night, and all of that. They are like the first things we think or when we speak of the language. So this is the end of today's podcast. Is I think it's been the longest until now since by far. And before I finish today's episode, I wanted to ask you if you would like to be the episodes longer or just like 10 minutes long or so are fine. The second thing I want to say is that I had an idea of making a podcast in Spanish or French, and I would like to know if you like that idea or no. But I don't know. See you next week. Bye bye.